close is it?
Based on the size of the table here that we're not
This is it.
expecting a large crowd. I thought Dale was coming today.
How do you say?
You're a good man. I did not.
Oh,
Right, but it's hard. It's hard. It's, you can't. Right.
Charles Court was paid. Can't pay my rent.
You got to show up in court. You got to go to court.
I was in housing court. Wife thinks I'm crazy doing all that stuff.
It's fun.
Yeah, but now someone's getting hurt.
I can see that or feel that. It's an issue.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to call the meeting to order and remind everyone that given that we are not taking any official action this evening, a quorum is not necessary. So my name is Carlos Shasura. I'm proud to serve as the Secretary of the Charter Commission, and it's my honor to chair this evening's meeting, and it's very exciting to be in Staten Island. I live right over the bridge in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, so I feel like I am a little bit part of Staten Island now. To my right, I'm going to ask our commissioners to introduce themselves, but why don't we start with you since you are from Staten Island?
Thank you, Carlos. My name is Mendy Mirachnik. I'm the president of the Council of Jewish Organizations, COJO. It's a great honor to serve on the commission. It's a great honor for the commission to come out to our borough. And Carlos, Bay Ridge is considered a suburb of Staten Island.
It used to be that Staten Island was considered a suburb of Brooklyn, but not anymore.
So, good evening. My name is Wendy Weiser. I direct the democracy program at the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU Law School, and it is a real pleasure to be here in Staten Island tonight and to see all of you taking time out to engage civically with the commission.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Marco Carrion. I currently serve as the Commissioner of the Mayor's Community Affairs Unit, and it's great being here in Staten Island.
Good afternoon. My name is Una Clark. I'm a former educational consultant for the City of New York Agency for Child Development for all of Staten Island in the early days of Head Start and daycare. I'm a former member of the New York City Council, and I'm a creature of the Charter revision of 1989 when the City Council was expanded from 35 to 51. I became the 51st member. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. So tonight is the last of 5 public hearings that we are holding in each of the 5 boroughs. This also happens to be the location where we held our first public hearing. It seems like a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago. If you wish to testify, please sign, please sign up at the welcome table. Every mayor has the opportunity to appoint a charter revision commission to review the city's charter, essentially, which is the city's constitution. Our role as members of the Charter Commission is to listen to the public, to hear testimony, both orally and written, and come up with recommendations that will amend the charter. These recommendations will be presented to the voters in November at the general election, and the voters will be able to vote if they want the changes or if they do not. Now, we have conducted extensive outreach in preparation for not just tonight, but all of our hearings, and I do want to thank the staff for all the work they've done on this commission. We have followed all required notice procedures. We posted public notice in the city record, obviously on the commission's website. We've sent e-blasts to thousands of New Yorkers. Notices have been in every major New York City media outlet, ethnic and community news outlets, community boards and community groups, elected officials, and so on. This meeting is being live streamed at nyc.gov/charter. Videos and transcripts from our prior hearings and meetings are available on our website. Tonight we have sign language interpreters and loop listening devices available. We also have Spanish language interpreters and headsets available so you can listen to the hearing or testify in Spanish. So tonight's meeting is open to anyone who wishes to speak. Tonight is about the charter. We are reviewing the entire charter, and we welcome your comments on any aspect of the charter. However, this is the stage of the process where we try and narrow down the focus, because as we said, the charter is very large. Last week, we released our preliminary staff report, which is available on our website, nyc.gov/charter. You will also find the executive summary of the report, which has been translated into 10 languages. We are seeking public feedback for this preliminary staff report, and we particularly invite comments on the 5 areas of focus that we've heard a lot about and that are described in the report. 1, campaign finance reforms. 2, elections in New York City. 3, civic engagement. 4, the role of community boards. And 5, the redistricting process. If you wish to speak, as I mentioned, please sign up at the table. The way we will do it is we will take testimony for 3 minutes. We will do panels of 2 people at a time. So I will call 2 people at a time. Come up, introduce yourself, and you will have 3 minutes. And we will be tight on the 3 minutes so that everyone will have an opportunity to speak. Obviously, no matter what time you arrive, if the hearing is still going on, we will be allowing you to speak. So I think the great thing about this process has been the public engagement, the public participation, and the openness of the dialogue. We've heard many, many different testimonies, not just relating, by the way, to the city charter. We've heard just in Staten Island at our first meeting, issues about affordable housing and different things. So it's been wonderful to hear what's been on New Yorkers' mind. And even though they are not part of a charter revision, it's important that we, as community officials, know what's going on in the city and that your voice has been able to be heard, you've been able to testify, and there is a record of the concerns that you share. And that's been something very exciting. So with that, before I begin, I do want to recognize the Regional Director for Intergovernmental and Community Affairs for State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli, Daniel Nurse. Thank you for being with us. Give the Comptroller our regards. Okay, so I'm going to call up 2 people at a time. You will testify, and then if there are any questions from the panel, we will take it from there. So the first 2 speakers are Douglas Kellner and Mary Luke. And the next panel will be Alice Underwood and Michael Parsons. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Douglas Kellner, and I'm a co-chair and one of the 4 commissioners of the New York State Board of Elections. Obviously, my remarks tonight are my own and not official policy of the Board of Elections. But I've come here tonight to primarily speak on ranked choice voting and to support ranked choice voting. I've read your analysis in the preliminary report, which I thought was very good and a very fair analysis of the issues. I think that my first priority is that the current system of the citywide runoff primary election 2 weeks after the initial primary election is unworkable and fraught with potential problems and is unduly expensive. And that it should be a priority to eliminate that runoff primary election. The best way to resolve that issue is to have instant runoff voting so we can preserve the purpose behind that runoff without going through the incredible difficulties faced by the New York City Board of Elections in trying to manage that runoff primary election in such a short window, and the very substantial expense incurred in running that primary election. The numbers involved in running a runoff primary election vary, mainly because of so many costs that are not direct costs of the New York City Board of Elections. The direct costs of the New York City Board of Elections are usually estimated at between $10 and $12 million for a runoff primary election. But you also have the costs of police overtime, the costs of Board of Education, and others involved in it. Another issue I want to focus on is that technically it's very doable to implement instant runoff voting. Minneapolis uses the same voting machines that New York City uses. The cost of adding on the algorithm for instant runoff voting is less than $1 million, which is easily recouped the first time you don't have a citywide runoff election. I personally favor using it for all municipal primary elections, but certainly replacing the current runoff for the citywide is a priority.
I hear a beep.
I know my time is up, and
time is up? Okay.
Thank you very much, honorable commissioners, for hearing our testimony. My name is Mary Luke, and I'm co-chair of the steering committee of the New York City for CEDAW Coalition, and I'm also president of the Metro New York chapter of USNC for UN Women. So I'm here to speak on behalf of CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, a recognized international human rights treaty that has been approved by 179 countries, and the United States not being one of them. I speak to the issue of civic participation of all people, women, men, transgender people, gender nonconforming people, and recognize that New York City law recognizes the diversity of gender, but we also want to recognize intersectionality and all forms of discrimination. We're very pleased that the mayor has just released to the UN a report on social development in New York City, becoming the first city in New York to do so. And he states that New York is on track to become one of the more equitable, healthier, and safer cities in the world due to our latest achievements in sustainability and increased commitment to fight for social and economic progress. And I'd say that in order for New York City to achieve its goals, it really must adopt CEDAW as a human rights framework, and that this should be reflected as a basic tenet in the city charter. We recognize that all issues are women's issues, and that although the city has done very well in terms of gender equality, economic development, there's still much more that needs to be done, especially for disenfranchised people. So we really strongly encourage the City Charter Commission to include CEDAW and a human rights framework as part of the principles that underlie the whole City Commission. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments?
I do. Thank you both for testifying. And so my questions are directed to Mr. Kellner, and thank you so much for coming out and talking to us in support of ranked choice voting. And we've well, I'll start with, do you have a recommendation as to whether or not this should be applied to all races or only a subset of races for the instant runoff voting?
I think it would be simpler if you applied it to all municipal races. It's true that in the odd year when you have municipal races, there will still be some races for state offices such as district attorney and judges, which the city charter cannot change to ranked choice voting. But I think it'd be simpler if all of the primaries for city council, borough president, and citywide offices used ranked choice voting.
Great. And so my second follow-up question that you that this leads to is we've heard a lot of testimony in support of instant runoff voting about its benefits, its cost savings, its potential turnout benefits, and ability to expand the slate of candidates. And we've also heard a lot of testimony and has seen written testimony on its workability. Several people have raised questions on this commission about whether or not it would be confusing for voters. And in your position as a commissioner of the Board of Elections, I would be interested in your view as to in the cases where there might be different kinds of races, whether it would be confusing and what it would take to alleviate any confusion.
Well, I think your preliminary report fairly analyzed the issues. You look at the jurisdictions, and there are many of them throughout the country that have introduced ranked choice voting. And my experience in reviewing them is a very positive one, especially how it changes the dynamic of campaigns. Obviously, you have to invest some money in voter education. But again, the amount of expense in voter education is just a small fraction of what you would spend for a citywide runoff primary election.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Great, thank you. We've also been joined by another commissioner. Dale, if you want to introduce yourself.
Good evening. My apologies for running a bit late. My name is Dale Ho. I'm a lawyer at the American Civil Liberties Union. I'm glad to be here. Thank you all very much for coming out tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to call up the next panel, and we actually will do 3 people on a panel. Alice Underwood, Michael Parsons, and Yvonne O'Neill.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Alice Underwood, and I have lived, paid taxes, and voted in New York City for almost 20 years. I'm also a volunteer board member of an organization called Fair Vote. And I also would like to speak to the issue of ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting. The first thing I'd like to say about it is it's really easy. It's a system that people use all the time. It may not be called out to you, but just by saying, here's my first choice, here's my second choice, I think it's very easy to explain to people how to do it. And as we've heard in the previous panel, it has a number of benefits. It can help to improve the voter turnout. It saves a huge amount of taxpayer money, and it rewards candidates who reach out more broadly. So I would like to strongly urge the Charter Commission to take the action to adopt this as a recommendation. As we've said, the New York City has the right to adopt instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting as a charter amendment. And as Mr. Kellner explained, it could save us, upwards of $10 million each time by not having to have that runoff election. The current voting equipment that we use requires only this modest software upgrade, as has been discussed. And with that, I'd just like to say that a system that can help more people express their true choices, that would encourage candidates to reach out more broadly and connect with more voters, has benefits well beyond the cost savings. Those are quite significant. It really will help to encourage civic engagement and make our elections something that people feel proud to participate in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael Parsons. I'm an acting assistant.
Can you just move that closer to you?
Yep.
Hold on, we're going to get you a better chair.
Oh, it's all right. I can just move in here.
You could maybe move the table up a little bit so you're not.
Thank you. Hi, thank you again. My name is Michael Parsons. I'm an acting assistant professor at NYU Law, as well as an adjunct fellow at Fair Vote. I wanted to come here today because I think there's a lot of engagement on this issue, a lot of popular support for this issue. We're living in a time when I think people are very interested in structural issues like money in politics, gerrymandering, some of these things that sometimes don't get noticed but fundamentally influence our democracy and the kind of outputs we have as well as the process we have. And I think that to reward that engagement would be useful. I think also that we've heard a lot about some of the financial costs of the runoff system and how it would benefit to go to a ranked choice voting system. I think there are also democratic costs with the current system that we need to consider, which is a lot of runoffs tend to end up being skew wider, tend to skew more affluent than the first election. And so this is something that could potentially create more opportunities for communities of color, for candidates of color, for women. And so this is, I think, something that could expand that pool. And what I was happy to see in the staff report that the commission has retained someone to look into issues like this because they're vital. And I think that we've seen in a lot of localities, for example, in the Bay Area, we've seen great turnout in terms of candidates of color, communities of color having better results. And so if that's indicative of what could be possible, I think that that's well worth the investment in just new equipment in order to improve our democracy. Also, in terms of turnout generally, I know that the staff report indicated that they were interested in the impact on turnout generally. And I think that we've seen in Maine with the first statewide race, as well as in localities over the past few elections, increased interest, increased turnout, which I think makes sense. I think a lot of people who don't feel like they're really heard in the process feel like with ranked choice voting, there is an opportunity to actually be heard. Whether or not their real preferred candidate ends up being the one who wins, they have a chance to have an impact further down the line. So you don't have these spoiler effect systems where if you're interested in a third-party candidate, you feel like this election isn't for you and you have to choose the least bad option. You can choose the option you like, and then for your second ranking, you can choose the option who would be somebody you might be forced to choose otherwise in the existing system. So obviously there are lots of financial costs to consider and advantages that I think would come from eliminating a runoff and moving to ranked choice voting, but I think the current system imposes a lot of democratic costs on our communities right now, and so to be able to improve the system in this fashion, I think would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Yvonne O'Neill, and I want to thank the Honorable Commissioners for having this another opportunity to address you. I represent NYC for CEDAW. My colleagues and I have been coming to these hearings because we wish to have the principles of CEDAW, that is the Convention and the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, as it incorporated into the revised city charter. This evening, I want to make a strong case for 3 issues: gender mainstreaming in public policy and programs undertaken by the city; 2, gender parity in appointments to commissions; and 3, gender responsive budgeting. On gender mainstreaming, first, women's as well as men's concerns and experiences must be integral to the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of all policies and programs. Given gender differences and inequalities within societies, it cannot be assumed that women and men will have equal opportunities. Special attention to the needs and priorities of women and girls is greatly needed to avoid unintentionally increasing gender inequality. And equality between women and men is a matter of human rights and social justice. On gender parity in appointments to commissions, achieving gender parity is an urgent priority, not only as a basic human right, but also as it is essential to an organization's efficiency, impact, and credibility. It is important to create a working environment at all levels that embraces equality, eradicates bias, and is inclusive. According to the World Economic Forum, a variety of models and empirical studies have suggested that improving gender parity may result in significant economic dividends, which vary depending on the situation of different economies and the specific challenges they are facing. Notable recent estimates suggest that economic gender parity could add an additional $250 billion to the GDP of the United Kingdom, $1,750 billion to that of the United States, and $320 billion to France's, and $310 billion to the GDP of Germany. Other recent estimates suggest that China could see a US 2.5 trillion GDP increase from gender parity, and that the world as a whole could increase global GDP by 5.3 trillion by 2025 by closing the gender gap in economic participation by 25% over the same period. Imagine what gender parity holds for New York City. As I mentioned on Thursday, gender-responsive budgeting is not about creating separate budgets for women or solely increasing spending on women's programs. Rather, gender-responsive budgeting seeks to ensure that the collection and allocation of public resources is carried out in ways that are effective and contribute to advancing gender equality, and women's empowerment. It should be based on in-depth analysis that identifies effective incentives.
If you could wrap up, your 3 minutes are up.
Okay, for implementing. Well, I just want to say that I want to thank you for this opportunity, and together, let us work to make our beloved city the preeminent CDAW city in the United States.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, we thank you for coming out tonight. The next three speakers will be Sheila Katzman, Howard Katzman, and Daniel, looks like Chilton. What is it? Chilton. So Sheila Katzman, Howard Katzman, and Daniel Chilton.
Thank you. Good evening. I am Sheila Katzman, the chair for New York City for CEDAW. I'm also the president of the International Association for Women in Radio and Television, and I'm a retiree of the United Nations. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you again, because we very much want this opportunity to do the right thing, making the global local. We're asking the New York City Charter Review Commission to consider our call to New York City, for New York City to implement a process that makes CEDAW a priority for all review deliberations. Reviewing the city charter at this time gives us the opportunity of making rights real. Yes, we should keep what is working. However, we should change or amend those laws and policies that are not working properly for the progress of this great city. So much has changed since the Charter Review of 1989. For example, who could have comprehended public recognition of same-sex marriage and how important it is to recognize transgender and conforming gender. I would like to thank you for holding these hearings and raising the important issues of community boards and the other areas of focus. Racial discrimination and inequality must also be on the agenda. I call for the Commission to ensure that the revised charter should be grounded in human rights principles as its foundation, including equity, equality, and inclusion, and utilize rights-based definitions such as those laid out in CEDAW. The inclusion should assess gender and racial discrimination and equality where they converge rather than separately, and address the intersection of these with other identities, including but not limited to sexual orientation, religion, ability, ethnicity, nationality, class, age, and legal status. Contain a strong implementation plan that is funded, fully implemented, and includes adequate resources for positive results. The Commission must ensure public engagement in the process of the Gender Commission and the public's voices are heard and their concern taken into consideration. I bring the CEDAW rights-based frameworks to you based on successes of San Francisco and Los Angeles. These laws, being based on CEDAW principles, have resulted in 44 months without a single domestic violence homicide, gender equality principles initiative, which range from employment and compensation to supply chain practices and support more productive workplace for women and men.
Your time is up.
I felt the hand
Thank you
going
very
up
much.
behind me. Thank you.
And it's good to see you again.
Thank you. Same here.
Hi, my name is Daniel Chilton, and I've been a proponent of ranked choice voting for about 30 years. I'm a member of the Staten Island Progressive Action Network, where we have adopted ranked choice voting, used ranked choice voting, and if you learn anything from me tonight, it's not all instant runoff is ranked choice voting, and I'm going to hit that really hard. A lot of people have spoken very eloquently about the cost savings and how it's more engaging, and you don't have to show up to the polls twice, but there are other benefits. A couple months ago, I went to my Democratic club and did a lovely presentation on the merits of the various systems and the shortcomings of the existing systems. And after one of the people had a chance to actually use ranked choice voting, he said to me, "Dan, ranked choice voting is easy." So explaining it is hard, especially the relative merits. So there's really only 2 points I want to make tonight, because I think others have done such a great job of it. Ranked choice voting, if you do it right, eliminates the spoiler effect. That is to say, you can vote for a dark horse candidate and your vote still matters. If he's the last place contender and he only gets 2% of the vote, your second choice counts. So you can feel free to vote for your conscience, which is extremely important. But if you go down the wrong road and think that all instant runoff is ranked choice voting, you're wrong, and you'll be misleading people. So I want to make sure that you understand that ranked choice voting or ranking your votes could be a two round system where the top 2 are selected, and then the top 2 in the second round make the final choice. And you would be lying to them if you said that this eliminates the spoiler effect, because the spoiler effect would be present. Ranked choice voting, if you do it properly, has multiple rounds and eliminates the least popular candidate, and their votes get their second choice gets reattributed until there is a majority winner. What we do in New York State and in other places is you pick the top 2 and then they run against each other. All the second, third, and fourth place votes get tossed out because there's 2 that got, let's say there was a 4-way race. One guy got 26%, the other got 27%, and the others got 24 and 23%. You're going to pick 2 of those and make only 2 of them eligible for the next round, the final round, I'm almost done. The final round. So please be really clear in your minds that ranked choice voting is not any old instant runoff voting. And I'm done.
Thank you. Right on cue.
Thank you. Oh, please, there's so much good things to support.
Good evening. I'm going to talk about government and civic engagement through adding gender lens to the charter. My name is Howard Katzman. I represent the New York City for CEDAW Coalition, a city's initiative ensuring that New York City explicitly recognizes the effect on women and gender of all its actions. I am policy and strategy on the steering committee. New York City for CEDAW does represent the community in coalition. When we held a daytime news conference on the steps of City Hall, over 200 people participated. Over 100 organizations were represented. The diversity of gender, women, men, LGBTQ, gender nonconforming, the diversity of age, ethnicity, race, our coalition of over 300 organizations has spent over 4 years listening to the communities and to government leaders to develop this initiative. January 2016, over 400,000 New Yorkers marched for gender justice. The next year, over 200,000 New Yorkers again marched. Since then, we've seen the Me Too movement take hold and question the ways we interact. Our awareness of gender justice has been growing in the last 2 years, leaving business as usual no longer acceptable. New York City also needs to raise its awareness. How do our policies, funding, and employment practices affect gender? Do we only ask these questions for so-called women's issues? Well, all issues are women's issues, as well as men's issues, as well as issues of all New York City residents. We're not used to asking these questions, so this initiative helps. CEDAW is an international human rights treaty dealing with women and gender. The articles of CEDAW motivate the objective questions we need to ask to truly know whether we are inadvertently discriminating. Then we include a public component so the government can receive the assistance of the governed in formulating solutions. Putting this proposal into our charter will be a major step in becoming aware of how we inadvertently may not be taking into account the needs of all our residents equally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments?
I just have one question for either of the proponents of New York City for CEDAW. Does that proposal also include implementing CERD or other human rights treaties dealing with racial equality, or is that addressed otherwise in the charter?
CERD is, in some sense, race has been dealt with quite strongly. Okay. And we've also, there was a previous council initiative that was talking about those two things, but the issues of gender and the issues of race are different, solutions are different, and to confuse them is to the detriment of both.
Got it. Thank you.
I think I concur with my colleague and namesake, but I think that CEDAW covers everything in a sense that once you do a gender assessment, you will find those disparities across race, gender, age, religion, ethnicity, etc. It brings everything to the fore. But to buttress what Howard Katzman said, I would say that we have to go thinking about ICERD as well and what it means. And everything is overlapping, and it's very important once we get CEDAW into place to see what comes out of it, because race was a big factor in San Francisco and Los Angeles as well. So it is an all-encompassing framework. And like elastic, because you know of all the different reviews, general recommendations, that like the amendment that comes into place with CEDAW. So it's there to, like elastic, to move about and take everything into consideration. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you very much. The next panel is Megan Ahern, Valentin Camano, and Elizabeth Irwin. And I want to remind everyone that the draft report, the 5 areas of focus that we will be looking at are campaign finance reforms, elections in New York City, civic engagement, community boards, and redistricting. Ms. Ahern, you're up.
Good evening. My name is Megan Ahern. I'm the program director for the New York Public Interest Research Group, or NYPIRG. So just to get through my 3 pages as quickly as possible, summarized a few of our recommendations, but also handed in a larger packet for the commissioners. Our staff report reacting to your staff report. So to summarize on campaign finance, we support lowering campaign contribution limits, increasing the public match, eliminating the cap on public matching funds and lowering the minimum requirement to participate in the program. And to briefly expand, we agree with the New York City Campaign Finance Board's suggestion to lowering contribution limits from $5,100 to $2,250 for citywide offices, $2,950 to $1,750 for borough offices, and $2,850 to $1,250 for city council seats, which will help small dollar contributors play an even larger role in city campaigns, boost candidate independence, and encourage greater civic participation. We also support the proposal to raise matching rates from 6 to 1 to 8 to 8 to 1, and agree with Reinvent Albany that the match increase should only be done for small contributions rather than the first portion of larger contributions. We also agree with the Campaign Finance Board to lower the thresholds for participating candidates running for citywide office, and the CFB proposes adding a geographic requirement to get at least 50 contributions from each borough for citywide office. We support that and also think it should be done for borough president races. Also, that is supported by the Brennan Center. To summarize on civic empowerment, New York City should do all it can to bolster the work of nonprofits that currently administer programs that encourage greater civic participation. As you may know, NYPIRG does this. We've been working for more than 40 years with the CUNY City University of New York, or CUNY, and registered tens of thousands of students, often new voters, and administer unique peer-to-peer civic experiences. And these proven successful programs can be scaled throughout the city really quickly. Also want to add that we support ranked choice voting, as was talked about extensively here, just ditto to all that. And also think the city can work on a felony paroled voter education campaign to reinstate voter rights and educate people on parole about their right to register to vote.
Thank you very much. Valentin Camano.
Good afternoon, Your Excellencies and government officials. My name is Valentin Camano. I'm a UN representative for Man Up campaign, delegations overseas outreach. And it is important for youth to get involved and have concrete implementations for the CDAW bill, such as yourselves who have experienced and gone through some kind of form of struggle and challenge to get to where you are. For us, gender lens and human rights frameworks are important to be included in these commitments so youth can also get informed and stay informed, because we are following these transitions and regulations so we can have result of course of action, as well as gain results for New York to be whatever it is today on the international platform, as being recognized as the most cultural diverse country in the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the Charter Review Commission, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you tonight. The International Federation of Business and Professional Women.
Can you speak closer to the mic?
Closer? Sorry, I hear my voice clearly. The International Federation of Business and Professional Women represents more than 60,000 members worldwide with a politically active chapter in New York City. My name is Elizabeth Irwin, and I'm a member of the New York chapter, a representative to the United Nations for the chapter, as well as an attorney practicing in New York. I submit these comments on behalf of the New York chapter of IFBPW. The New York chapter of IFBPW recommends that the Charter Review Commission adopt and implement CDAW for the City of New York in order to assess policies through a gender-based lens, providing significant economic and social benefits for New Yorkers of all genders. By using a gender-based lens, more than 50% of New York's population's needs will be more accurately and mindfully addressed. As you've already heard, CDAW is an international treaty negotiated and ratified by 189 out of 193 countries around the world, with the exception of the United States, and adopted in 1979 by the UN General Assembly. CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, defines what constitutes discrimination against women and sets an agenda for national action to end such discrimination. Specifically, implementing CEDAW would require a gender-based analysis of city operations, workforce, programs, and budget, oversight body to monitor implementation, and funding to support the implementation. Cities for CEDAW campaign is a grassroots initiative to encourage local governments in the United States to support gender rights by adopting local ordinances based on CEDAW principles. It provides the theoretical and analytical tools to enable local governments to assess their actions through a gender lens. 9 cities have adopted CEDAW around the country, and 29 cities have strong resolutions moving towards ordinances, and 31 more cities are exploring resolutions and ordinances. New York, as the leading city of the United States, must take its place as a leader in promoting values of equality and social justice for all its citizens. For women to fully and equally participate in society, they must be seen. We would like the New York City Charter Review Commission to resolve that all city programs, all city funding, and all city employment utilize gender-based tools and techniques to assess the impact on women and gender. Adopting a cross-agency CEDAW gender-based lens in San Francisco has resulted in a 44-month drop in domestic violence homicides to 0. A gender analysis of city agencies, a family-friendly workplace ordinance, and a gender equalities initiative. We believe that the effect of adopting CEDAW in New York will result in a proportionally larger set of economic and social benefits for the city of New York.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments? Great. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Our next 3 panelists are Deborah Tangent, Kevin Rizzoli, and is it Savannah Brown? Savannah Brown? Is Deborah Tangent here? Okay. Great. Good evening.
Hi. You have the cutest baby ever. Oh my God. Start.
We're ready.
Okay. Hi, I'm Deborah Tangent. I've never been to a meeting like this before. I'm a citizen. I'm a senior citizen now and just retired. And I happened to hear on the radio yesterday this whole idea of ranked choice voting. And then I heard there's a meeting in Staten Island. So you're a couple miles away from where I live. I'm in Staten Island, so here I am. I think that it's a really great idea. It's very exciting. One of the things that has really upset me and really concerned me is the fact that we have such low voter turnout. You see what goes on in other countries and what people do to vote, and we take it just for granted, and we really don't have a participatory democracy. And I do really think that this would help. Don't solve everything, but I think it would help. I think that also, I don't think it's going to be too confusing. Us voters are generally pretty smart, and I think that we'd need some money for education, but I just learned that we could maybe save 10 million with getting away from the runoff vote. I think that that would work. And I think it would also help with spoiler issues. Maybe not solve all those, but help with that. So I just think it's a really cool idea, and I hope that we can do it.
Thank you. Kevin Rizzoli.
Thank you, Commissioners, for giving me time to speak. I'm the CEO of Riselo Ranches, a produce and farming company within the United States of America, a veteran-owned business. I'm speaking on behalf of my brothers, growers and receivers of fresh produce, which generates over $2 billion in taxable revenue within the city of New York. The serious violations of implementation of the Business Integrity Commission in the inception stages, which was started by former Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, and has compounded into the losses of thousands of jobs in the Hunts Point terminal market, and several hundred serious violations of due process of law. Several companies went bankrupt because of such acts of consorting
within the Hunts Point Terminal Market Board of Directors, which has now yielded allegedly power to only one person to oversee the ID process as he chooses, which I believe is a violation of due process of the law, which I don't think our mayor would allow, even though the BIC says is not going on. The loss of jobs is a serious problem since $2 billion of taxable revenue of the sales of produce is being lost to other states, mainly New Jersey and Philadelphia, which had just opened up, as you know, several years ago, a state-of-the-art distribution facility in their city. I believe that the serious due process violations of the United States Constitution is at the council's, how do you say, right, and laws need to be changed in governing such market commission procedures. Delegation of power to one person is a serious, to me, a violation of due process of law, which is the United States Constitution. As being a veteran and a constitutional law recipient of Old Dominion University, which I don't think our Constitution, nor the New York State Constitution, would tolerate such. One person making a decision based upon a fact of giving a business integrity commission is not, to me, due process. One person, no. Evidence has to be produced, hearings have to be conducted, and I believe both sides need to make an active case against such companies, persons, or entity. And I'm sorry I took so long, but my time is up.
Time's up. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm Savannah Brown, and I'm the Assistant Executive Director at Black Women's Blueprint. I am also on the steering committee for NYC for CEDAW. Black Women's Blueprint supports using and adding to each of the subject areas a gender analysis based on CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which you've heard about tonight. Black Women's Blueprint knows that we are a city not only in need of a strong gender equity revisions that are robust, coherent, and grounded in critical analysis, but also of intersectionality, which attends to the multitude of identities that make up who we are and how we move through the world. The 16 core articles of CEDAW provide a replicable yet consistent template of indicators through which city agencies can activate the proposed action plans and analyze and report on racial and gender equity with ease using a human rights framework. We are counting down the days until VAWA expires, which is not likely to be reauthorized at the end of September. With the recent federal administration's threats to make vital cuts to anti-rape, anti-battery, and anti-stalking services through the Violence Against Women Act, we are running out of places to turn to for safety and justice. New York City must be on the front lines of protecting the rights of the most marginalized residents, and that is women and girls in our communities who are under siege. We need policymakers to listen to them, and we need to institute mechanisms for public involvement and oversight over any and all gender and racial equity efforts. A core component of our efforts is a goal of ensuring not only access to equal opportunity, but also equal outcomes that reflect human rights understandings of non-discrimination and equality. Intersectionality is also embedded in CEDAW. This means that gender barriers are seen in the context with all other overlapping forms of discrimination, including on the basis of race and socioeconomic status, level of ability, not as isolated issues. We expect a gender analysis to happen across every single city department. This means we'll know what our officials are doing in terms of women's rights, and we also expect an oversight body focused on gender analysis and any gender equity issues. The city should earmark 25 cents for every woman and girl who resides in the city to go toward ending gender-based violence and ensuring economic justice through quality jobs. We seek to ensure the following areas across the board for all women and girls in New York City: human rights initiatives on behalf of women, that women acquire the full realization of all of their rights within New York City, and that they are supported in the aftermath of violence through outcomes-based projects that increase their civic engagement-based building and voter empowerment especially. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? No? Okay, thank you. Our final panel will be Laura Del Preti Conde, Janine Materna, and Frank Morano. Frank, I was getting worried that I haven't seen you yet during this process.
I'll make up for any.
Thank you. I'm sure you will. Okay, Laura, you are up.
Good evening. My name is Laura Del Preti Conde. I am the program director for the Staten Island COAD, which stands for Community Organizations Active in Disaster. The support of community-based coalitions and community-involved disaster planning is essential and needs to be included in the 2018 Charter Revision Commission. We unfortunately have disaster amnesia, and people only remember the most recent disaster and forget the litany of disasters that have been left behind in our history. Luckily, the Staten Island COAD has been doing very large work with a very small agency. Funding of borough coalitions will ensure a better prepared community, a community that responds and recovers faster, and in turn saves the city money. For every dollar in preparedness, we save $7 in recovery. The Staten Island COAD is one of the highest functioning coalitions in New York, and becoming an official part of the charter allows us recognition by city agencies and assists us with moving forward in our preparation work. The Staten Island COAD has trained hundreds of New Yorkers in Stop the Bleed, active shooter training awareness, community preparation, and even how to use a fire extinguisher. Though based in Staten Island, our reach is wide. When disaster occurs, be it man-made or natural, the community connections that the Staten Island COAD has with local nonprofits, city, state, and federal officials will help communities be safe, be ready, and be able to recover. Even though every disaster starts and ends on a local level, but those doing the local work need support. Please consider the importance and support of community coalitions such as the Staten Island COAD. Thank you.
Thank you. Janine Materna.
Great. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you for being here today, this evening. My name is Janine Materna. I'm president of the Pleasant Plains, Princess Bay, Richmond Valley Civic Association, and recent graduate of New York Law School, and a very politically active individual here on Staten Island. Despite all the passion and the hype that often accompany local and state elections, many New Yorkers still do not vote. And voter participation in New York State has declined dramatically over the past half century and now stands near the bottom as compared to other states. For example, in 2016, New York ranked 41st in the nation in voter turnout. The majority of states, 37 plus the District of Columbia, now allow early voting. New York's election law does not provide for early voting, and tonight I'd like to advocate for my support for election reform as a way to increase voter participation. Currently, some 36 states permit it, and New York's election law is silent on this issue. Early voting in so many states has proven to invigorate campaigns and increase voter turnout. This reform has the added benefit of facilitating voting on election day by reducing waiting time and generally improving voting procedures in the polling place. The people that this would most help are the families who are working with children in school, those who work during the day, those who work during the night, who have shift hours. And with sports activities and homework, they all intend to vote, but just don't have the opportunity, and things come up that day, and they just don't make it happen. So I'd like to encourage the commission to please consider revising the charter to include early voting so that more people in our community will have an active voice in our community. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Frank, you get to close us off tonight.
Terrific. Thank you, commissioners. It's good to see you again. I want to thank you for coming to Staten Island, and thank you for your service throughout this whole process. People may not have a full appreciation of the work that you put in, but I know it's a lot of work, takes a lot of time, and you're expected to go to every corner of the city to listen patiently as person after person criticizes you for everything that you're not doing. So we do recognize, many of us, that it is a great sacrifice in terms of time and energy, and we do appreciate it. Let me also say, on that note though, criticize you for a few things that you're not doing. I think there's a number of great suggestions related to electoral reform, and I certainly agree with what everybody said today about instant runoff voting and ranked choice voting. And the report that the staff has produced is terrific. And I understand that's a finite amount of time, and you're trying to get questions on the ballot for this November, and you can't put everything, you can't hold hearings on everything that everyone suggests. That being said, I'm very disappointed that there was not a single public meeting dedicated to studying the issue of proportional representation. As I indicated, the 12 years, you can clap, it's okay. The 12 years that New York City had proportional representation to elected city legislature was the most politically diverse in our city's history. And to not only not hold a hearing on it, but omit it completely from the report as if no one suggested it, it reinforces a lot of negative stereotypes that people may have about the commission, that it may have a predetermined outcome, or that it's perpetuating the status quo. That being said, there's two minor subjects that I don't believe would require a great deal of study that you could still get on the ballot this November. The first has to do with the easing ballot access requirements. The 2010 commission, which Commissioner Sisura served on, one of the great things they did was amend Section 47 of the city charter to cut in half the number of raw signatures to run for every office in New York City. But they cut in half the raw number. So it was great for Republicans, great for Democrats, great for independent candidates. But for minor parties, it still maintains that 5% threshold of signature requirements. So that means if you're running for office in the city as a Republican or Democrat, you need to get about, in most districts, 0.05% of the people in that district to sign your petition. If you're running as an independent, you just have to get 450 signatures from any New Yorker of any party. But there's still that 5% requirement for members of minor parties. As a member of a minor party myself, I can tell you how difficult that is. Those of you that have run for office before appreciate the difficulty of collecting minor party signatures. So I would encourage you, add to Section 47 of the city charter and build on the work that the 2010 commission did and cut that 5% requirement in half to 2.5%. And lastly, I would just encourage you, put in the city charter that this process should be permanent. Let's have every mayor, every speaker, every public advocate, every borough president have the ability to appoint a charter revision commission that would meet in perpetuity for 2 years to perpetually make recommendations to the public, to the mayor, and to the city council. Every charter commission, and I've testified at every one since 2002, every single member of the commission that I've known in that time has said, I wish we had more time. I wish we had more time.
Your
Give yourselves
time is
more
up.
time.
Your time is up on that note. So I will say this about Mr. Morano. He's been an advocate both on the last commission and this commission, but a couple of questions. Actually, I'm going to let Dr. Clark go and then I'll come back.
I wanted to ask a little bit more about early voting. How early is early voting in your mind?
I would say between 12 and 14 days.
Say that again.
Excuse me? Between 12 to 14 days. Early voting before the actual election.
Okay, all right.
So I had two questions. Proportional voting, I believe, I'm not going to say it by 100%, but I believe you're one of the first or second maybe people to bring it up during these hearings. But just for clarity, what exactly do you mean by that?
In New York City in the 1930s, the legislature was the Board of Aldermen, and it was as corrupt as the day is long, controlled by Tammany Hall, and not just corrupt, but ineffective. So Mayor LaGuardia and the reform movement that became popular in the 30s said, let's do something different. So they chose to have a new city council elected to replace the Board of Aldermen and have proportional representation, which a lot of other countries do. And basically, what it means is that you would get votes in proportion, you would get representation in proportion to the number of votes you get. For instance, here in New York City, in the last round of municipal council elections, 20% of New Yorkers voted to be represented by Republicans. Yet there are only about 6% of Republicans in the New York City Council. So we have a legislature that's not truly representative of the way that people are voting. So to allow proportional representation, it gives a fair opportunity for minor parties, both Republicans and working families, independents, conservative, reform, and so forth. And it allows people that may have different issues that they want to bring out, be it NYCHA reform or education reform or healthcare reform, to run a slate on and get votes and legislation in proportion to that. Israel does this. Italy does this. New York City used to do it, even up until we elected the New York City school boards, the community school boards. So there's no reason that we shouldn't at least have a hearing on it to hear from experts about the benefits and I mean, they did away with it because 2 communists were elected in the midst of the Red Scare, but those communists were elected. So the solution was to basically go back to clubhouse-controlled politics. And unfortunately, the times these days, if you read the papers, are way too similar to the Tammany Hall era for my tastes.
And then my second question has to do with your charter review proposal. Are you saying that we should state in the charter that the mayor must?
So what if you put a question on the ballot this year, should, at the conclusion of every election, the mayor, the speaker, the public advocate, the controller, the borough president, be able to appoint a charter review commission, a charter revision commission, to hear input from the public, make recommendations to the legislature, and if they should choose to put questions on the ballot? Because
but that's already in the charter that they can call a charter commission.
It's not mandated.
So you're saying, so very simple, you're saying we should say that it should be mandated as opposed to they may do it.
Yes.
Perfect. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I guess I have one follow-up question for you relating to I guess one of the other proposals that have been put forward is to make the redistricting process more independent, which I'm just wondering if that goes in any way to address some of the concerns that you raised, and do you support that proposal?
Well, certainly I'd prefer a nonpartisan independent redistricting commission to a partisan non-independent redistricting commission. But I think the broader problem is that political minorities still aren't being truly represented. And I think, that if you are dealing with, say, the South Shore of Staten Island, where whomever the Republican candidate is going to win, irrespective of the nature of the redistricting commission, or the North Shore of Staten Island, where whomever the Democratic candidate is going to win, you're really disenfranchising political minorities in those communities. And while redistricting, making it more independent and doing away with gerrymandering as much as possible, it doesn't do anything to increase representation to political minorities.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you very much for being here. So I believe we are concluding with our public testimony. I want to thank everyone again for attending this evening. Our next meeting will be on August 14th at 1 p.m. Do we have a location for that? No. Location to be determined. And that's where we will discuss the findings of the report and take further action. So I thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful evening.